Most people who look at Tucson don't start with a clear yes or no. It usually starts as, this could work, but I don't know if now is the right time. And from what I've seen, that question now or later is where people tend to get stuck. Because the answer isn't just about Tucson. It's how the move fits your life, your timing, and what you're actually trying to do next. When people try to answer this, they usually focus on a few things: the market, interest rates, prices. And those things matter. But over time, timing decisions based only on the market tend to feel uncertain, no matter what the numbers say. The people who make clear decisions usually aren't guessing. They're evaluating a few specific things that tell them whether moving now actually makes sense for them. Moving now doesn't just mean buying a house this year. It means committing to a different daily rhythm, a different environment, a different structure to your life. And for some people, that creates momentum. For others, it creates friction. In Tucson, that friction tends to show up in very specific ways. People visit in January or February. There's perfect weather, everything feels easy, and then they move quickly by in June or July. The routine is completely different. They're planning their day around heat. Morning and evening become the active windows. Midday becomes something you avoid. Even social life shifts. When you go out, how often? Where you spend your time. For some people, that adjustment feels natural. For others, it creates a low-level friction every day, and that friction usually isn't obvious right away. It builds slowly once the routine becomes permanent. I've also seen people choose a home based on timing instead of understanding the micro market. For example, someone buys in the Catalina Foothills thinking they're getting ahead of demand, without fully understanding how pricing, inventory, or even sun exposure behave differently there, compared to somewhere like Oro Valley or the Northwest Side. And later, the question isn't about whether Tucson works, it's whether they chose the right version of Tucson. And that's a different problem because you can like the city and still feel slightly misaligned every day based on where you landed inside it. And with second home buyers, this shows up a little differently. Someone purchases during winter, when everything feels active, social, and easy to justify. But they haven't experienced what it's like to own and maintain a property here in the summer. And that gap between expectation and reality is where timing decisions starts to matter. Because you don't feel it during the visit, you feel it once you own the responsibility. So the real question isn't just, is Tucson a good idea? It's, does moving now align with how I'll actually live once I'm here? From what I've seen, there are a few patterns where moving now tends to make sense. If your life is already moving in a direction where Tucson fits, that slower pace, more space, less emphasis on constant activity, then waiting usually doesn't create more clarity, it just delays something you've already started adjusting to. The people who move comfortably aren't just trying to time the market perfectly. They're making decisions from a position of clarity and stability. They understand what ownership actually costs here: property taxes, insurance variability, summer utilities, long-term maintenance, and they're not relying on just ideal conditions. That's what makes the move feel grounded instead of uncertain. Some people wait for the perfect moment: lower rates, lower prices, better conditions. And sometimes those things do happen, but from what I've seen, the people who are most satisfied with their move are usually the ones who prioritize control over precision. They chose when to move instead of trying to predict when the market would cooperate. On the other side of that, there are situations when waiting actually makes more sense. If the reason for the move isn't clear yet, if it's more of a reaction than a direction, then moving tends to create more questions than it solves. Tucson works best when it's chosen intentionally. If your timing keeps shifting, 6 months becomes a year becomes we'll see, that's usually a signal the decision hasn't fully formed yet. In those cases, waiting tends to create clarity instead of delay. One pattern that shows up is people making decisions based on a short visit, usually during the best times of the year, and then later realizing that the full experience of Tucson, especially summer, changes how the city feels from day to day. If you haven't experienced that yet, waiting and observing tends to be the smarter move. What tends to happen in some cases is people move too early, and instead of feeling settled, they start questioning the decision itself, not because Tucson is wrong for them, but because the timing was. In practice, this decision gets clearer when you stop asking, is now the perfect time? And start asking, is my life already aligned with this move? Am I financially stable for this, not just hopeful? Do I understand what living here actually feels like across seasons? If those answers are mostly yes, moving now usually works. If those answers are unclear, waiting usually helps. Because getting the timing wrong here doesn't just affect the purchase, it affects how the entire move feels after you've already committed. And for most people, it's not all yes or all no. It's somewhere in between. That's where people tend to get stuck the longest, because they're trying to figure it out without a structure. If you're trying to decide whether to move now or to wait, this is usually the point where it helps to slow the decision down a little, not to delay it, just to make sure the timing actually fits your situation. Because most of the mistakes around timing don't come from the market. They come from how the decision connects to everything else: your lifestyle, your flexibility, your tolerance for uncertainty, and what this move needs to do for you long term. That's typically where the Navigator conversation fits, not around predictions, but around clarity. If you want to work through that before you commit, I've outlined how to approach it below. Timing matters, but clarity matters more, and the people who make the best decisions don't rush. They just understand what they're deciding. Thanks for watching.